Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Carl Jung. You live in a cage you cannot see. No iron bars, no locked door. And yet, every step you take is measured. Every word you speak is weighed against the fear of how someone else will react. This is the painful truth of emotional blackmail. It feels like freedom on the surface. You laugh, you work, you plan your days, but beneath the surface, every decision has already been shaped by invisible hands. You are told, if you don't do this, I'll be hurt. Or, if you walk away, you'll lose me forever. No chains hold your body, but threats and guilt tighten around your soul. That is the invisible cage. It is built not with steel, but with silence, fear, and emotional debts that were never yours to pay. And in that cage, something happens. You begin to shrink yourself. You smile when you want to cry. You agree when you want to say no. You keep the peace, not because you believe in it, but because you are terrified of what will happen if you don't. This is how emotional blackmail steals life, one small compromise at a time, until you barely recognize yourself. What fuels this prison? The fear of losing love. Humans are wired to seek connection, to be abandoned, to be rejected. It cuts deeper than any physical wound. And so you surrender. You hand over your power willingly, thinking it will buy you safety. You tell yourself, if I just give them what they want, things will calm down. But does it ever truly calm down? Or does the demand return? Stronger, sharper, more suffocating? Think about the times you've stayed in conversations that drained you, in relationships that silenced you, in jobs where your value was tied to obedience rather than truth. Each time, the same fear whispers, if you say no, you'll be unloved. If you set a boundary, you'll be left behind. So you bend, you bow, you give more than you can bear. And still, the hunger of the blackmailer is never satisfied. But here lies the deeper truth. What controls you from the outside is often born from the inside. Jung called it the shadow, the hidden part of you, shaped by old wounds and buried fears. The blackmailer doesn't create your fear. They simply find the crack in your armor and press against it. If your shadow carries the wound of abandonment, the threat of leaving terrifies you. If your shadow hides the wound of shame, a hint of disapproval burns like fire. The blackmailer studies you like a hunter studies prey. They listen to your silences, your hesitations, your trembling pauses, and then they weaponize your shadow. That's why the cage feels so inescapable. It is built not only by them, but by the part of you that has not yet been healed. So the question becomes, what are you truly afraid of losing? The person who blackmails you, or the image of yourself you built around their approval? Because here is the painful truth that cannot be avoided. Emotional blackmail is not about their power. It is about the power you abandon every time you believe their threats are stronger than your truth. And until you see the cage for what it is, you will keep mistaking it for love, loyalty, or responsibility. The chains are broken the moment you see they were never real. Nothing has a stronger influence psychologically on their environment and especially on their children than the unlived life of the parent. Carl Jung. Emotional blackmail does not arrive dressed as a threat. It comes disguised. It comes wrapped in the language of care, affection, even sacrifice. You hear the words, "I'm only saying this because I love you. I only want what's best for you." And because those words sound tender, you swallow them. You believe them. Yet beneath the sweetness lies poison. The very thing that promises safety is the thing that drains your soul. This is the sweet poison. It begins small. A partner says, "If you really cared, you would do this for me." A parent whispers, "Don't disappoint me. I've done so much for you. A friend sighs. After all I've given, how can you refuse? The words sound gentle, but the message is sharp. Your freedom is a threat to their comfort. And so you compromise. You give in. You convince yourself it's not a big deal, it's just one sacrifice. But slowly the sweetness turns bitter. What looks like love erodes your ability to choose. What looks like care keeps you small. It's like drinking from a cup laced with venom. You taste honey, but it weakens you with every sip. Then comes the trap of obligation. The blackmailer knows guilt is a heavy chain. They know you want to avoid conflict, so they dress their demands in moral clothing. They make you believe you owe them. Think of the times you said yes when every part of you wanted to scream no. You told yourself, I'll just do this to keep the peace. You told yourself, if I make them happy, maybe things will finally calm down. But peace built on self-betrayal is not peace. It is silence forced upon your spirit. Obligation convinces you that your worth is measured in how much you can endure. You take on more, stretch yourself thinner, bury your needs deeper. A child becomes the parent's emotional caretaker. A partner becomes the hostage of another's insecurity. A friend becomes the dumping ground for endless demands. And each time you comply, you lose a piece of yourself. You start to forget what your own voice sounds like. You wonder if you even have the right to want something different. Guilt is the tool that makes the cage feel permanent. And then comes the cruelest illusion of all, the mirage of love. The blackmailer tells you that control is proof of devotion. They say, I wouldn't be so jealous if I didn't love you this much. They insist, I only pressure you because I care so deeply. And when you resist, they make you believe you are the one destroying the bond. But love that chains you is not love. It is domination. A mirage looks like water in the desert, but the closer you walk, the more it disappears. Emotional blackmail is the same. You chase the promise of closeness, of care, of loyalty, but it is never real. True love does not require submission. True love does not punish honesty. True love does not weaponize fear. What you were told was proof of love was in fact proof of control. And when you finally see the illusion, everything changes. You realize you were not loved for who you are, but for how well you obeyed. You realize the bond was never built on love, but on fear. And once that illusion is shattered, you begin to understand the truth. Love that suffocates is not love. It is a mask worn by control. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Carl Jung. Every chain of emotional blackmail has its roots in the past. Long before someone threatened to leave you, long before someone whispered guilt into your ear, the ground was already prepared, and it was prepared in childhood. That is where the first contracts were signed. As children, we are helplessly dependent on love. We cannot survive without care, without acceptance, without belonging. And so, when love feels conditional, we make silent agreements with ourselves. If I please you, you won't leave me. If I stay quiet, you won't get angry. If I hide my feelings, you'll still approve of me. These agreements are never written on paper, yet they live in the body, in the nervous system, in the very core of identity. The child who laughs at jokes they don't understand, the one who hides their tears to avoid punishment, the one who earns perfect grades to be noticed, all of them are paying the same price. They are trading authenticity for survival, and when that child grows into an adult, the contract is still in force. They find themselves saying yes when they want to say no. They give more than they can afford. They silence their needs because long ago they learned that being themselves was dangerous. This is how the shadow is born, through the exile of the real self in exchange for security. And then enters the unseen puppeteer, the blackmailer. They are not creators of your fear, only manipulators of it. They do not invent your guilt. They simply pull the strings that already exist. Imagine an old wound hidden under layers of time, still raw when touched. The blackmailer knows where to press. They watch your reactions, your hesitations, the way your voice shakes when rejection is hinted at. They recognize the child still living in you, the one who trembles at the thought of being abandoned, and they use it. A partner threatens to leave unless you obey. A parent implies you are ungrateful if you set boundaries. A boss hints your job is at risk if you refuse extra work. In each case, they are not planting fear. They are awakening the fear that has been there all along. That is why their control feels so total, because it is tied to a story you began writing before you could even speak. But here is the most haunting part. The blackmailer is also a mirror. They reflect back to you the shadow you have not yet faced. Jung said that what we deny in ourselves will meet us in the outside world, often in forms we cannot ignore. The person who controls you is showing you the part of yourself that doubts your own worth, that questions your right to exist as you are. They are the echo of the inner critic, the living embodiment of the fear you tried to bury. Every time they say, "You're nothing without me," they are voicing the whisper already inside you. Every time they make you feel guilty for wanting freedom, they are feeding the wound that already believed freedom was selfish. This is why emotional blackmail is so powerful. It is not just an external battle, it is an internal confrontation with the shadow. You are not only facing the manipulator across from you, you are facing the child within you who still believes they must perform to be loved. You are facing self-doubt that has never been healed. And until that wound is met with compassion and light, you will continue to be vulnerable to those who know how to press it. The path forward begins with recognition. You cannot fight what you refuse to see. You cannot free yourself while pretending the cage does not exist. To break free, you must name the contract, see the strings, and dare to face the mirror. That is the work of individuation, reclaiming the parts of you that were silenced so no one outside you can ever hold them hostage again. The shadow you ignore will rule you. The shadow you embrace will set you free. You cannot find yourself by going into the past. You can find yourself by coming into the present. Carl Jung. For years, you've worn a mask. At first it was subtle, a smile when you wanted to cry, a nod when you wanted to refuse, a laugh when your heart ached. Over time, the mask hardened. You built it to survive, to gain approval, to avoid the sting of rejection. But masks are not meant to last forever. Every act of compliance, every small betrayal of self, leaves a crack. The cracks begin as whispers of discomfort, a twinge of anxiety, a sense of emptiness, the quiet question, who am I really doing this for? You try to ignore them, you push harder, smile brighter, bend lower, but the mask no longer fits. It pinches your skin. It rubs against your bones. The life you are living feels borrowed, not earned. Borrowed from the expectations, fears, and desires of others. Depression and anxiety creep in quietly, like shadows in the corners of your mind. Even your laughter tastes hollow. You reach for control, for certainty, but find only emptiness staring back. And then comes the storm of confusion. Every choice feels like a betrayal. If you speak your truth, you betray the one who controls you. If you stay silent, you betray yourself. You are caught in a relentless tug of war, a battle between your inner voice and the external demands pressing upon you. Imagine standing in the eye of a hurricane, winds howling on all sides, your body pressed to the ground by invisible hands. That is what it feels like to live under the weight of emotional blackmail. Simple decisions, what to say, where to go, how to act, become impossible. Your mind races, your heart pounds, And yet every option seems wrong. Every action carries guilt, shame, or fear. You become a ghost in your own life, floating through moments without anchoring to yourself, unsure where you end and they begin. Eventually, the false self can no longer sustain itself. The collapse arrives not as a sudden explosion, but as a slow disintegration. The person you've been performing as shatters. Every carefully constructed image, every compromise made to survive, falls away. It is terrifying to look into the mirror and see fragments of someone you barely recognize, but this death is necessary. The old identity, the one shaped by fear, obedience, and survival, is not real. It was a construct to protect the vulnerable child inside you. Only by letting it break can truth emerge. Only by witnessing the collapse can you begin to gather the pieces of a self that is whole, authentic, and unafraid. The storm clears, and for the first time, you see the possibility of standing in your own skin, unmasked, alive, and free. The self must fall apart before it can rise whole. Love is a fire, but whether it warms your heart or burns your house down depends on what you feed it. Carl Jung. For years, you believed in a version of love that was never real. You told yourself, this is what love looks like, this is how it should feel. And every time you complied with demands, every time you swallowed your own needs, every time you silenced your voice to avoid conflict, you believed it was proof of love, but it was not love, it was fear. Fear masquerading as care, fear wearing the mask of devotion. The mask is now removed. When you peel away the promises, the whispered assurances, the gestures wrapped in guilt, you see the truth. True love does not demand the sacrifice of the soul. True love does not punish honesty or obedience. What held you captive was not affection or loyalty. It was fear of rejection, of abandonment, of disapproval. That fear was dressed in the clothing of love, so convincing that it blinded you to the reality. The person who controlled you was never in love with the real you. They were in love with your submission. And here lies the turning point, breaking the spell. Recognition is the first step toward freedom. Once you see the cage for what it truly is, you cannot pretend it was ever anything else. You notice the patterns, the guilt, the manipulation, the constant testing of boundaries. You see the difference between care that nurtures and control that suffocates. You realize that your compliance was not devotion, it was survival. You understand that the anxiety, the endless self-questioning, the weariness in your chest was the price of living under an illusion. And as the spell lifts, as clarity pierces the fog, something remarkable happens. You feel your first taste of liberation. Freedom is not loud or dramatic. It is quiet, subtle, a gentle uncoiling of the heart that has been bound too long. Finally, you redefine love. Love is not a chain. It does not demand obedience. It does not drain the soul or silence the self. Real love nourishes. It supports, it expands, it allows growth without fear. Real love encourages boundaries without resentment. It welcomes individuality without punishment. Anything that suffocates, that manipulates, that forces submission is not love, it is domination disguised in tender words. And once you see the difference, once you understand the contrast, you hold the power to choose differently. You no longer chase shadows of affection. You no longer settle for fear. Wrapped in a smile, you can step into relationships and into life with clarity, with dignity, and with a heart unburdened by illusion. Love that demands your surrender is never love. Freedom is the first act of true devotion. Knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darknesses of other people. Carl Jung. You have been running from yourself for years. You've avoided the quiet moments, the reflective silences, because they threaten to bring you face to face with what you've long buried. But true empowerment begins not in the world outside, but in the dark rooms within. To enter that room, you must first gather courage. It is not the courage of the body, but of the soul. Imagine walking into a room with no lights, only the faint glow of awareness guiding your steps. Every shadow you see is a fragment of yourself that has been ignored, denied, or shamed. This is where the child you once were hides, the one who learned that survival meant surrender, that safety meant silence, that love was conditional. Entering the dark room is terrifying because it forces confrontation with pain that feels like it could consume you. Yet it is also the threshold of transformation. The darkness is not meant to destroy you. It is waiting to teach you, to reveal the parts of yourself that have been scattered so you can gather them and become whole. Individuation begins here, by facing what you fear most and daring to stand in the light of your own recognition. Once inside, the next step is dialogue with the shadow. Imagine sitting with your wounded child, the one who trembled under expectation, who hid their tears to avoid anger, who learned obedience at the cost of self. Speak to them with compassion. Tell them, I see you, I understand why you surrendered. You did what you had to do to survive. Listen to their stories, their fears, the quiet voice that has been muted by decades of compliance. Healing begins here, in the tender recognition of your own suffering. By naming the pain and honoring its existence, you reclaim authority over it. You realize that submission was never a weakness, but a strategy born of circumstance, and that now you have the power to choose differently. This conversation is not hypothetical. It is a conscious encounter with your inner truth, a reclaiming of agency that has been denied for far too long. Finally comes the sword of awareness. Awareness is not merely intellectual, it is a living, breathing clarity that severs the strings the blackmailer once held over you. You see the patterns for what they are. Old wounds exploited, fear masquerading as control, guilt dressed as obligation. Once illuminated, these strings have no power to move you. You act from presence, not pressure. The blackmailer's grip loosens because you no longer give it energy. Your decisions are guided by insight rather than anxiety, by choice rather than compulsion. This is the essence of empowerment, standing in your own sovereignty, unshaken by external threats, unbowed by manipulative forces, fully aware of the wounds that once made you vulnerable, and fully capable of healing and moving forward. The shadow you embrace becomes the source of your strength. Nothing has a stronger influence psychologically on their environment than the unlived life within you. Carl Jung. True strength is quiet. It does not roar. It does not demand attention. It does not plead for approval. The power to step away from manipulation, to refuse the chains of emotional blackmail, is rooted in stillness. When you do not react out of fear, guilt, or obligation, you reclaim sovereignty over your own life. Imagine standing in a room while storms rage outside, thunder crashes, winds howl, yet you remain unmoved, calm, anchored in your own center. That is the quiet strength of inner peace. Each decision to not engage in guilt-tripping, to not respond to manipulation, is a subtle act of mastery. It may seem small at first, a pause, a refusal, a boundary, but it echoes through your life. Others may try to provoke you, but the storm no longer controls your heart. The silence of your strength becomes louder than their noise. You are no longer a player in their game. You are the observer, the one who chooses how to move. Freedom begins with choice. Every no you utter to blackmail is a declaration of self-respect. Saying no is not defiance. It is affirmation of your own worth. Each refusal sends a ripple through the patterns that once held you captive, signaling that you will no longer participate in fear disguised as love. By choosing yourself over submission, by honoring your boundaries, you step onto the path of individuation. You are not only protecting yourself from external control, you are reclaiming the life that was always yours to lead. The fear of loss may whisper in your ear, but the quiet voice of integrity speaks louder, reminding you that respect, clarity, and authenticity are non-negotiable. And then comes the dawn of a new self. Picture it. Light spilling into a darkened room, illuminating corners that were once hidden. The chains that bound you to obligation, guilt, and fear crumble. You breathe deeply, feeling the weight lift from your chest. The person who stands before you is whole, undivided, and free. There is no need to shrink, to comply, to sacrifice for survival. You move forward in clarity, carrying the lessons of your past without being enslaved by them. Each step is deliberate, guided by insight rather than compulsion. The horizon opens wide, promising a life of authenticity, peace, and the quiet power of a self that chooses its own path. Peace is not found in surrendering to chaos. It is claimed in standing firm in your own truth.